Hey there, YouTube. I'm Ikitsu. This is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to a little bit of Sins of Solar Empire 2. So today we're going to be talking about the Vorastra Titan, which is the Vasari Exodus Titan. And here's where I have to sort of talk about how I don't play Vasari. I play enough tech to actually know how to use the Ragnarov to a certain extent and the Ankleon. I main basically Advent Reborn, and I play a decent amount of Advent Wrath. But I've sort of mentioned this before. I don't play any of Vasari. Like, I just don't really care for their sort of style, and I don't really care for their way their economy works, which confuses and scares me. So I don't have any experience whatsoever, really, with the Vorastra. Not only in using it, but for some reason I don't see it get used very often. I'm sure that this is just because of the bias of my search engine results, where I'm looking up, like, Advent content, and for some reason that means that I'd never see Vorastras, but I see plenty of Ragnarovs, I see plenty of Ankleons, so... I think it's just my search algorithm not showing this to me. I did try to look a little bit about what this thing's about, but yeah, I'm not too sure how people typically use this thing overall. Anyhow, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what it has here. The stats are going to be a little bit off because I accidentally got two techs that I wasn't really supposed to, and we've got, of course, our baseline techs. Or sorry, one tech that I wasn't supposed to. So yeah, its numbers are going to be adjusted a little bit, but those are numbers that we can't really do anything about, honestly. So durability of 750, we've got 8,260 shield points, 4,140 armor points, and I believe that it's 16,000 base hull points. And our antimatter, I think, is 450. I accidentally got a base or an increase to our antimatter pool there. For hidden statistics, we're looking at a 90 armor strength and a 540 maximum speed. So the maximum speed of the Vorastra is actually really slow. However, it's much better at getting away from things than it looks because it's got a lot of interesting mobility tools, whether it's phase resonance items, support from other ships in the fleet. There's a bunch of things that you can use to make it a little bit faster. However, a Vorastra that's on its own, that has not leveled up micro phase jump, is very, very vulnerable. So you do have to keep that in mind there. So for weapons, we're looking at 12-point defense guns at, I believe, 6 base damage per second with 0 pierce for a total of 72 damage per second. You got 4 heavy beams at 10 damage per second with 500 pierce for a total of 40 damage per second. You got 12 heavy wave cannons at, I believe, 12 damage per second with 300 pierce for a total of 144 damage. And 2 heavy phase missiles at, I believe, 90 damage per second with 600 pierce for a total of 180 damage per second. The Vorastra's main guns, when it starts off, are kind of okay. They're not really that impressive. And I don't necessarily know that the Vorastra is like a super deadly killer out of the gate there. So for weapons that you can add to this thing, you've got access to the hangar bay. This is going to give it 10 additional squadrons. This is not a carrier. This is just going to be if you have literally nothing else you can fill this in with, but it's going to be hard to justify this one. The Vorastra Super Heavy Wave Cannons give you, I believe, 75 damage per second with 420 pierce each, at a total of 150 damage per second. This isn't amazing, but this is perfectly serviceable. It does actually mesh well with the fact that this thing already has got the 12 Heavy Wave Cannons doing basically double wave cannon damage if you get that. This also meshes well with the wave modulator and the upgraded wave modulator, which is one of the stronger Vasari weapon upgrades. So you can actually get to pretty high wave damage with this thing, making this into a pretty good anti-cruiser specialist with okay damage against capitals. Anything heavier than that, you're seeing pretty badly diminished returns on that investment, and against anything super light, it's a bit overkill. The other weapon that you can get here, of course, is the Vorastra Phase Cannon. This gives you 200 damage per second with 1,000 pierce. This is by far the stronger of the options for this ship here. And there's a couple other things here. These are not really weapons. We'll get into them later. But the Vorastra Phase Cannon, tacking that on there immediately makes this thing like a fairly deadly combatant with its guns in anti-Titan or anti-capital or anti-command ship roles. It even lets you sort of crack into starbases a little bit, although that's not really what I think this thing's weapons are designed for. The overall impression of like the weapons on this is that you're not looking at the best anti-Titan or anti-capital sort of weapon loadouts, but you're looking at a respectable amount for that role, and you're looking at very good clear against enemy cruisers or lighter. That's a general sort of rule for this thing. For abilities, you're looking at Micro Phase Jump. This is a short-range teleport that's capable of getting you some additional damage on your opponent that you land on. Cooldown is 60 seconds, dropping down to 36. I do wish that Vasari numbers made sense. Everyone else would be 60, 45, 30. These guys are 60, 48, 36 for some reason. Range is 12,000, scaling up to 36,000, and the antimatter cost drops from 120 down to 60. Damage is 120, 240, 360. The damage is pretty negligible. Now, this is where we start talking about the other things. If you get the Micro Phase Jump Enhancer, in addition to these effects, you also give your opponent a 12% weapon reload penalty in the radius. This is a much bigger radius than it looks like because the Vorastra itself is gargantuan. This means that if you hop this into the middle of the enemy fleet there, you can nerf their attack speed. The problem is that it's such a small value that it's hard to say that it's great. I do think that's nice, but I don't think this is a good dedicated support ability. The uptime is too low, although it can get okay. The damage on this is not good enough for you to want to really spam it as opposed to using it for repositioning. And the weapon reload rate penalty for getting the Micro Phase Jump Enhancer, it's just not really that impressive. I do think that if it was like 36% or 40% or something like that, that would be very, very strong. But at 12%, it's barely anything. The next ability here is the Maw. This is basically a instant kill against anything that's not a capital ship and is completely useless against capitals and up. Cooldown of 90 seconds, range 4,200, antimatter cost is 90. This stays constant no matter what. You've got this radius of 4,200, and what you do is you consume basically instantly killing frigates, corvettes, cruisers that are in the cone in front of you. Whatever gets pulled into the Maw first gets eaten first. At level 1, it's 120 supply worth, and then it goes up to 240, then 360. So you can eat 360 supply worth of enemy cruisers all in one go. That's actually really, really big. The metal salvage and crystal salvage, you get a percentage of the cost of the ship that you consume as resources. 24%, 48%, 72% at the highest level. This is really, really good because it's an instant kill. Other abilities that can slowly kill a cluster of cruisers, that's fine, but being able to actually just remove a chunk of enemy cruisers off the field, instantly making it so that they're no longer doing any damage or anything like that, that's actually a really, really powerful thing there. The duration here is listed as 20 seconds. This is just basically how long the Maw has to suck things in. If things are in this cone, they can't move or receive orders or anything like that, and they'll just get sucked towards it, and if it reaches the ship itself, they'll just explode. I wonder, I haven't tried this, but I do suspect that if you have got a bunch of your ships being latched on by the Maw, the 20 seconds might matter in the event that you're pushing this thing backwards with the Oblivia or something like that, because if this thing gets pushed backwards by an Oblivia, I think that it still keeps the latch on, and it will just potentially take longer before it gets to eat them. So the fact that it's a long duration probably helps. I have noticed the duration seems to shut off, though, after it's consumed the supply max, so it's not necessarily going to get that full duration in every instance there. For this one, you got the enhanced Maw. This gives you additional weapon damage for every ship that you eat. I believe this is a stack per supply. So you don't have to eat very many ships to get the stacks for this. It gives you plus 0.6% additional weapon damage up to 20 stacks for a total of, like, not very much. Again, we're looking at 12% additional weapon damage for 30 seconds. This is okay. Again, not quite high enough to make it really dependable as an item that we would ever want to get, but you might want to consider it because this is one of the few ways to improve the damage on your phase cannon, which is not an upgradable weapon normally. The last ability is Desperation, and this is the one that is going to be the most reliable into the sort of later game in actual fights. When you take damage to your missing hull, you gain up to a 24% weapon reload bonus and a minus 24% damage taken bonus. And you also add splash damage. You add splash damage even if you don't have missing hull, and you get more of it as you sort of level that. Splash damage radius is 750. It stays that way. Everything else is 24, 36, 48. So pretty much a 50% increase at maximum level. Desperation is actually really, really powerful. As you get sort of weaker and weaker and weaker, your damage resistance gets increased, which for the Vorastra actually can end up in a state where it barely is capable of clinging on for a lot longer than you would expect. And this is because Vasari have that ability innately to regenerate their hit points, armor, and shields in combat. And they do so at a really, really fast rate. So anything that's sort of mitigating large amounts of damage can actually make it so that their ships are disproportionately surviving through those sort of situations there. Desperation is also pretty good for that weapon reload, making it so that their guns are all doing a lot more damage. This is similar in a lot of ways to how the Eradicate kind of fights, where it gets more dangerous as its health bar depletes. However, this thing I think is a little bit more reliable than having the ability to cast a bit faster, which is what the Eradicate does. And I think that this also has the added benefit of like making it so that you're a little bit sturdier without having to have your ultimate. Whereas the Eradicate, if it's activating its abilities, it needs to have its ult to actually get that kind of effect. And if it's doesn't have that as well, if it doesn't have the ult up, it's on cooldown or whatever, it can actually just explode rather than getting stronger. So this is a little bit more reliable than that, a little bit easier, but doesn't have that sort of fail-safe that the Eradicate has by just going invulnerable. If this thing's taking too much damage, its damage is over its healing capacity, it'll just explode, which is not really what you want there. The ultimate ability on this is probably the most interesting and probably the most strategically relevant, and that's phase tunneling. It's got an 11-minute cooldown and has a range of 36 astronomical units, which is, if we take a look here, that. What this does is you cast this from, like, here, we would cast this on, say, this planet over here, or maybe this planet over here, and it would create a phase lane that goes between those two places. Meaning that this ship and any other ship for 2 minutes are capable of just heading straight between those two planets. Giving you tremendous sort of ability to do interesting attacks into areas past the enemy's front line. And this is one of the more interesting abilities, I think, that are out there. This gives the ability for the Vasari to just skip entrenchments. If the opponent has gone for a very, very strong front line in some sort of situation, made it so that you can't get to them, and their capital or whatever, you could phase tunnel into their capital with this guy and a bunch of Volcoruses and a whole bunch of, what's it called? Desolators? No, I can't remember that. I never build these things. Chorastras? Yeah, you could get a whole bunch of Chorastra Destructors and you could just hop straight into the enemy capital gravity well and burn down their starbase really, really quickly with a whole bunch of Volcoruses, and then destroy like their planet before they can really respond. And I think that that would actually be a really, really, really powerful sort of strategy for a late game Vasari Exodus player. So yeah, there's a lot of different other things. I do kind of wish that phase tunneling did have that potential where you would jump somewhere awkward and you'd be able to like fight a bunch of stuff and destroy a bunch of infrastructure and stuff like that, and then like get another phase tunneling and get out of there so that you could like fight somewhere else, or you've distracted and pulled the enemy to that location and then you jump to somewhere to safety, or you go defend something like that. That would be kind of interesting, but generally speaking, I view phase tunneling as a bit of a one-way ticket, where if your opponent comes in with a serious fight, you're probably going to have to fight them. You're not going to be able to phase tunnel to get out of there. Or if they attack one of your other planets, you have to wait an entire age before you get phase tunneling back so that you can go respond to that. So it's a bit higher risk in some situations, so you have to really know what you're doing with it, have good intel and have good scouting, but this can be absolutely game-changing if you're capable of using this well. So let's talk a little bit about warfare research. This is one of those situations where we have to sort of note that for the Vasari, and Vasari Exodus in particular, because they've got the mobile research, it is always hypothetically possible for them to get to Tier 5. Hypothetically, if they had just one planet or even 0 planets, it is possible for Vasari to get to Tier 5. This is because they're capable of not only getting the sort of mobile research, they're also really, really good at getting research off of what planets they have, but they could just get more capital ships and have more capital ships produce more research and eventually end up in a situation where they've got completely maxed out research without having to actually have any planets or what have you. So unlike with the Advent and unlike with Tech, I am going to assume that Tier 5 is always on the table for them, but I should note it can be really expensive to get to tier 5 anyway. So even though you're capable of getting there, I don't necessarily guarantee that you're going to, in a practical sense of like money, being able to afford that money-wise is a different issue. But in any event, now I do think that the ship really wants to come out of the gate with level 2, so 3rd generation cruise is really, really good for it. The reason for that is it lets you have that combination of micro phase jump and the Maw. The combination of those two abilities, if you rush out a Vorastra and your opponent's got a bunch of cruisers or whatever, you can micro phase jump up and then use the Maw immediately. And it gets to the point where your opponent is losing a big cluster of ships that they might not have expected to lose, and they're losing it without really having a huge amount of time to react because you're getting that micro phase jump, getting right on top of them, and devouring them right away. This is actually a really potent combination during that early game where your opponent is maybe doing less capital ship stuff, and is reliant on those sort of cruisers or whatever to be able to do a lot of damage or support work. So this can be very, very good. The other combination that you could potentially do is have a more survivable one where you've got microphase jump and desperation. But I don't think that I don't know if you would really rush towards this sort of build here. I don't necessarily think there's a good synergy between the Maw and desperation, but if your opponent's not paying attention, maybe you could use the extra tankiness to get towards it, but I don't know if I would really go with that combination there. For weapons, we're looking at the pulse for your point defense. That's not really that important for the ship. The wave stuff can be very good if we're going to devote ourselves to that. The beams exist, but they're not very strong for the ship, so I wouldn't really focus on that too much. The exception to this is if we're doing raids. If we're hopping to our opponent's planet, then pinpoint bombardment, as well as like other sort of bonuses to the beam damage is going to matter because that's our siege weapon damage there. So that could be important in that case. The missiles, they're actually quite good on this just out of the gate. So especially if we're not going for a beam build, or sorry, a wave build, it can be a good idea to get those missile upgrades. But 180 damage with 600 pierce, that's not like that impressive. It's just good enough that you're going to want to get these eventually. But I don't know if I would rush them necessarily just for the sake of this guy. Precise turret servos can help a little bit, but the heavy turret servos are quite nice. Additional weapon range on those waves on a slower ship, especially one that's got wonky firing arcs. I don't actually even know exactly where all of its firing arcs are. This thing's got weapons all over it. But that can help out quite a bit there. And it also makes it so that the waves can be used against lighter targets that normally it wouldn't be able to track. I should probably mention, like, I do think that it's got good conversions with the missiles. I don't know that it's got great conversions with the beams. Its beams, I don't even know where two of them are, and I've never actually been able to figure out where two of them are. They've got, like, the two that are sort of, like, up here. Those are two beams. And it's just got studded with waves all over the place. I think maybe the beams are on the wingtips. It's just hard to look at those. That's hard. Yeah, the problem is like the way that the camera works. I think they might be on the wingtips there. So against certain targets, you're going to have weird conversions with the beams, but that's I don't really know the way the weapons on this thing work. Most important techs on this thing, I would argue, are going to be down here. Things like the reinforced nanite conduits, things like the self-repairing armor blueprint, things like anything that gives you extra regen is going to be really, really powerful for this guy. Things like the flawless armor are also going to be quite good, giving us a little bit of extra speed. Things like the phase attenuated shields are going to be quite nice. Things that give you extra regen all around. Any of those things are going to be strong for this thing because it's so beefy in terms of the amount of like armor and shields and hull that it has, that as it's regenerating itself, it's going to be in the fight for a long time. It's going to take a while to burn it down unless they've got an extreme amount of firepower. That extra regenerative capability is going to add up to a lot of extra hit points over the course of a longer fight there. That's kind of how I view those. For the specifics for this thing, you've got access to the microphase jump and answer from the start there. I don't really think this is amazing, but you could definitely go for it if you want to. You've got things like the mobile rulership. This isn't actually unique to the ship. You could have put it in an Anarchal Wanderer, and I do actually think it's better on that. You could also have the mobile fleet beacon. Again, I think those are better on an Anarchals. The Vorastra hanger, I don't think that that's any good for this ship. If you're going for a full carrier build, you could go for it, but I don't think you gain any real bonuses to your strike craft. So I wouldn't really recommend it. Hull Restoration 1 during the early phase is a good amount of extra like durability. Plus, you're getting that extra regeneration. Excuse me. And then you've got the Wave Cannon Restoration, which gives you those super heavy waves, which is really, really good in a lot of situations with this particular one. For the other ones, you got Hull Restoration 2 and Hull Restoration 3. Again, you're guaranteed to be able to get these. The question is whether or not you can afford to get these, not whether or not you're capable of it. In general, I would say that the ability to get the Phase Cannon Restoration is the most important thing, as well as Hull Restoration 3. If you've got Hull Restoration 3, getting that armor point kicker there from these two, it just adds so much strength to this thing in terms of its ability to survive that you're just going to have to... it's almost at Ankleon levels of durability at that point in time with its additional damage mitigation as well as its natural regeneration. The Phase Cannon really, really strong, and then the Maw Enhancer does also boost up the damage from the Phase Cannon and stuff like that, so it's also pretty okay. I think that you want to generally get to Phase Tier 5 with this particular one, even if it's going to be a slow sort of progress before you get there. Now, for Empire Research, we got access to a couple of different things, but they're not too important. You've got, of course, your antimatter stuff that's not actually super important for the ship. There's a couple of things that could happen that cause you to use it a lot. If you're using the microphase jump and you're using it very aggressively and you're using the microphase jump enhancer, that's when you really have to worry about your antimatter. But if you're using it rarely so that you can reposition, so you can use the Maw, so you can flee from a fight, whatever, you can chase down a running ship, then you don't really need to have a lot of antimatter. You could need the base text, though, for the phase tunneling because it costs 480 antimatter to use. So it's not super important for this thing to go like super deep or super prioritize this stuff, but you're going to want to have it eventually just so that you can get it there. You may need this against Advent, but I don't think that you're likely to actually still have antimatter even if you do get this. It just makes it so that they use Nullify a little bit more often than they would like to. Still, you may have to get this against some levels of antimatter drain if that's what you're getting hit by. The other thing, of course, is Phase Resonance. Phase Resonance could actually be pretty good for this, especially if you're trying to do those kind of lightning raids with phase tunneling. Getting you into a position where you could do whatever it is you're trying to do and then getting it done faster can definitely help with that. And also having that additional cooldown reduction does make it so you could potentially get another phase tunnel a little bit faster than you would normally. So for Phase Resonance, mobility can be kind of interesting with this thing. The thing about this ship is that it's pretty slow, so increasing its maximum speed by 18% is not a huge amount, but it is kind of okay. The thing is, if you've got this with the rest of the fleet, one of the things you can sort of do is have your Vorastra occasionally use a microphase jump to push itself forward, and you want to have your fleet moving on move-in formation so that this doesn't get left behind. If you're willing to microphase jump, you can actually make it so your fleet moves from position to position a little bit faster there. In which case, you don't really need mobility. But if you want your fleet to be able to get places a little bit more quickly, you could use this. Especially if you don't want to use phase tunneling just to relocate your fleet from one part of your own system to another part of your own system there. Like, you really don't want to be phase tunneling and spending 480 antimatter being completely dry when you arrive in an actual combat fight. So I do think mobility has got some potential here, but I don't really recommend it that highly. Combat is the probably strongest trait for this particular ship. It's got a decent amount of guns on it that all like having those sort of extra damage values. It's not the biggest gunship, but it's definitely big enough of a gunship to get a good benefit from things like the combat tree here. And utility is also quite okay with this one. The problem is that it's not really that important until you get access to phase tunneling. Being able to cast the Maw a little bit more frequently is about what you would be getting out of that, which is strong. Being able to cast that that much more frequently does actually make a difference, but you're not casting it by a super fast rate with utility tree maxed. It's just good enough. Once you get to level 6, this becomes actually quite strong. So for our other stuff here, we've got access to a couple different builds. So generally speaking, the way I think that you would get this is if you rushed it out and got it really early, you pick up micro phase jump and you go for the Maw. And in this particular build, you don't really need to have any items that importantly. You're still going to want to get the self-repairing armor, definitely. You may want to get phase attenuated shields if you're doing this early. You probably want to get the Vorastra super heavy wave cannons if you can get a chance to do that, and you probably want to get the wave modulator. And you may get the micro phase jump enhancer. You're probably going to try and get the Vorastra hull plating, but since you have to research tech to get that, to just get the base values, it's better to get the self-repairing armor and the phase attenuated shields first. The other thing that I would say is good is the gravity stabilizer. This is something that you may want to get fairly early on with this particular ship because it gives it the ability to push into a position a little bit more quickly and a little bit more easily so that it can use its combination there of the Maw and the micro phase jump. If you're getting this sort of later and you're not like just trying to rush straight into the enemy so that you can get that micro phase jump Maw combination off against their fleet while it's still vulnerable to it, you're probably going to want to hold off on this. Like, I'm sort of mentioning getting these items, but you're probably just going to like queue them up and then just keep running towards the enemy, not worrying about getting them actually built. If you got some Jasotras with the fleet, that would be great, but your priority is not to get those items. It's to get value out of the Maw and micro phase jump as fast as is possible, rather than sitting and waiting until you've got a fully itemized one. If you're later into the game where that's not going to work as effectively, like you micro phase jump in, you use the Maw, you eat like 8 Destros, and then the other 100 Destros immediately obliterate you, you're going to not want to play it that aggressively in that sort of way there. So if you're getting this later and you're still going for that type of build, I would definitely get the Vorastra hull plating, the self-repairing armor, the phase attenuated shields, and I would probably get the super heavy wave cannons in that instance there. And I would possibly even wait until I could get to a later tech tier so that I could get access to the hull plating 2 and 3 as well. That puts a lot into the defense tier here. At that point in time, we could get rid of the phase attenuated shields and get the Vorastra phase cannon as well. So that's generally a way of playing it. If I'm going later on and I'm not jumping straight into the enemy fleet right away, I may not get the gravity stabilizer either. But that's going to come down to the sort of situational sort of elements there. What I would never get for this thing is the Exotic Refinery Research Complex ruler ship or the Mobile Fleet Beacon. The ship is too front and center for me to want to get these on it, and it just makes more sense right now to get these onto the Anarchal Wanderers instead, because they're less likely to want to push straight into the enemy fleet in terms of combat. They're going to want to stick in the back and try and do other things. So this particular ship, I think you want to stack all those defenses on it. You want to get the offense on it. You want to have it jump into the enemy fleet and sort of disrupt it and make itself a big target and make it so it's kind of hard to ignore, honestly. It does sort of actually take up a lot of space, so a lot of shots actually will just get absorbed into it anyway, like a lot of missiles. So it can actually act as a sort of damage soak in a sort of weird way just because it's so gigantic. The other type of build that I would do is the micro phase jump into Desperation, and this gives you a lot of safety. This is if you're behind your opponent and they've got a quite strong fleet, they've had to tighten for a little while, you managed to get yours out there. This will let you keep this alive in the event that your opponent's trying to snipe it out there. And the micro phase jump can be used to sort of like reposition out of a fight, just like how you can reposition into a fight. And Desperation gives you that damage mitigation, so it'll sort of help out there. In this particular case, you're going to definitely want the self-repairing armor, the Vorastra hull plating right away. You're probably going to want to use that phase attenuated shield. If you can get all the regen on this thing going really, really hard, what you can sort of do is you can have it micro phase jump out of a fight and then come back into the fight pretty quickly afterwards because it's going to be regenerating really, really quickly. And every time it regenerates enough health to come back in, it's another sort of wave of your opponent having to deal with its nonsense. So I think that could be quite strong with it. But in that particular build, we're sort of building it towards becoming a late-game gunship that's sort of hanging on the edge of health there. We're still going to want to have a massive health pool, so we're going to want all the hull plating ones. Still going to want that self-repairing armor. In this particular case, we're definitely going for the wave cannon, the phase cannon, and the wave modulators. That's going to make it just maximum amount of gun power. I don't really think there's any synergy between the Maw and Desperation, so I wouldn't get that particular combination there. But you may end up in a situation where you got a micro phase jump in the Maw, and you're transitioning into the sort of later game. You don't want to keep leveling the Maw, and you end up leveling Desperation at that point in time. But I would never start off with this combo. I don't think there's any real synergy there. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I can understand about the Vorastra Titan. Those are the sort of two ways that I would personally build it. I do think that this does best as a sort of durable tanky ship instead of going for all-in on offense. Because going all-in on offense, you're getting like the phase missile augments. That's 24% with the upgraded version. On missile damage, you only do 180 missile damage. Like, it's fine, but it's not great. You got the beam modulator. That really doesn't make any sense for the ship. You've only got 40 damage per beams. So I would definitely say that the best outcomes come from the Vorastra phase cannon and the wave guns there. But that's sort of situational too. Like, if you're fighting against things that are not going to be cruisers or whatever, then you may want to get the Maw Enhancer, although that requires cruisers as well. Like, this thing really, really requires you to be fighting against lighter ships to get the best potential out of it, honestly. I think in the hyper late game, you sort of have to realize that this thing's never going to be the biggest threat on the field, at which point you gain a lot of threat from phase tunneling. That's kind of how this goes, I suspect. But yeah, that's everything about the ship. I hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.